Hi there. Tell me in the comments which country and city you're from. We're going in a different direction, Kaya. You're done here. That's how Patrick Sloan greeted me on his first day as the new boss. No handshake, no pretense of professionalism, just those 9 words delivered with the kind of smug confidence that only comes from someone who's never actually built anything. My name is Kaya Monroe. I'm 51 years old, former Navy supply chain commander, and until approximately 4 minutes ago, I was the Chief Operations Officer and silent majority shareholder of Vanguard Logistics International. The company I'd spent 3 decades building from a single warehouse in Baltimore into a multi-state distribution powerhouse. Now I was standing in what used to be my conference room, watching a 32-year-old with slicked back hair and a watch that cost more than most people's cars tell me I was obsolete. Patrick didn't even have the decency to look uncomfortable. He sat there in his $1,000 suit, one leg crossed over the other, scrolling through his phone like I was a package he was rejecting at the door. Behind him stood Lydia from HR, fresh out of grad school, clutching a manila folder like it might shield her from the awkwardness of the situation. Different direction, I repeated, keeping my voice flat. That's corporate speak for what, exactly? He glanced up, clearly annoyed that I was still talking. The board wants fresh energy. Someone who understands modern logistics, automation, AI integration. You've done great work here, but it's time to let the next generation take the wheel. Fresh energy. Next generation. The same tired phrases every young executive learns in their first week of business school. What Patrick didn't know, what nobody in this building except my lawyer knew, was that I didn't just work here. I owned here. 82% to be exact. Quietly accumulated over 28 years through stock conversions, buyback agreements, and strategic equity transfers that my former partner, Gerald Whitmore, had signed off on without ever bothering to read the fine print. Gerald founded Vanguard with me back in 1996. He was the face, the schmoozer, the guy who loved ribbon cuttings and charity galas. I was the one who made sure trucks left on time and contracts got fulfilled. When he decided to semi-retire 5 years ago, he handed operational control to his nephew Ethan Carter, who'd spent the previous decade managing a trendy co-working space in Brooklyn. Ethan lasted 18 months before burning through $2 million on a rebrand nobody asked for and a digital transformation initiative that crashed our order system for 3 weeks. The board finally pushed him out 6 months ago, and apparently Patrick Sloan was their brilliant replacement. If you're new here and enjoying these powerful stories, make sure to hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for more. Let me know in the comments what part of today's story touched you most. Private equity background. Consultant resume. 0 actual logistics experience. Perfect. I see, I said, folding my arms. And this termination, did it go through the proper board channels? Patrick's jaw tightened. I have full authority to make staffing decisions. That's part of my mandate. Your mandate, I said slowly, doesn't override corporate bylaws. Specifically, Section 12, which requires board approval for the termination of any founding executive. He blinked. Lydia shifted her weight behind him, her knuckles going white around that folder. I don't need a civics lesson, Patrick said, his tone sharpening. The board hired me to clean house and modernize operations. You're a relic of an old system. This company needs leaders who can think 5 years ahead, not 5 years ago. I didn't react. Didn't raise my voice. Didn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me rattled. Well, I said, picking up my bag from the table, I guess we'll see what the board has to say about that. I walked out before he could respond. The hallway was too bright, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like a swarm of mechanical insects. I moved past cubicles where people pretended not to stare, past the break room where conversations died the moment I appeared in the doorway. Everyone knew something had happened. They just didn't know what. I took the stairs instead of the elevator. Needed the time to think, to breathe, to let my pulse settle back into something resembling normal. By the time I reached the parking garage, my phone was already out, hotspot activated. I climbed into my Subaru Outback, older model, still reliable, and set my laptop on the passenger seat. The screen lit up, and I opened the encrypted folder I'd prepared 6 months ago when Ethan's disaster was still fresh and I realized the board might make another catastrophic decision. Inside that folder was everything. Every stock certificate, every amended shareholder agreement, every board resolution dating back to 1997. My name appeared on page after page, signature after signature, A quiet accumulation of power that nobody had bothered to track because Gerald never thought I'd need to use it. 82%. Patrick thought he could erase me with a sentence. What he didn't realize was that he'd just activated a trap I'd been setting for years. I clicked through to the master document, the Emergency Shareholder Action Protocol, buried in Section 12 of the corporate bylaws. I'd written it myself during our 2018 expansion, back when Gerald was too busy planning his yacht trip to read anything I put in front of him. The protocol was simple. Any termination of a founding executive without full board authorization triggered an immediate executive review and temporary suspension of all non-founder decision-making authority until a formal vote could be conducted. In other words, Patrick just fired himself. I attached every relevant document to an email, added all 9 board members to the recipient list, and hovered my cursor over the send button. One click. That's all it would take. I thought about Gerald, about the early days when we'd worked 18-hour shifts to keep the business afloat. I thought about the hurricanes we'd navigated, the recessions we'd survived, the endless nights I'd spent coordinating shipments while he slept soundly in his suburban mansion. I thought about Ethan burning through cash like it was Monopoly money, and now Patrick, who probably couldn't tell a forklift from a pallet jack. I clicked send. The system tracked delivery in real time. 9 names, 9 green check marks. Every board member now had the full picture whether they wanted it or not. I leaned back against the headrest and let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. No relief yet. Just certainty. Patrick thought he'd won. But the game was just beginning and he didn't even know the rules. My phone rang before I'd even pulled out of the parking garage. Logan Pierce, my attorney for the past 15 years. His voice came through the speaker, crisp and professional as always. Kaya, I just saw the packet. Clean work. No ambiguity. Good, I said, eyes on the rearview mirror. Because we're about to test every word of it. The protocol's airtight. I reviewed it again this morning after you called. Section 12 is ironclad. Patrick Sloan has no wiggle room. He doesn't know that yet. He will, Logan said. The board has to respond within 72 hours. That clock started the second you hit send. I pulled onto the main road, merging into midday traffic. What's your read on the board? Depends on who's paying attention. Gerald's vote is complicated. He won't want to undermine his own legacy, but he also won't want to admit he lost control of his equity. The others, Fletcher, Carrington, Oakes, they're pragmatists. They'll follow the numbers. And the numbers say I own the company. 82%. They'd have to be idiots to ignore that. Another call buzzed in. I glanced at the screen. Gerald Whitmore. Logan, I need to take this. Go. Call me after. I switched lines. Gerald. Kaya. His voice was tight, strained, like a rope pulled too hard. Tell me what I'm looking at here isn't real. It's real, I said calmly. Every document, every signature, every transfer. All legally executed, all board approved. 82%? How the hell do you have 82%? Because you signed it over. Piece by piece. Starting with the 2004 buyback, then the 2011 restructuring, then the 2018 expansion equity swap. You never read the paperwork, Gerald. You just signed wherever I told you to sign. He went quiet. I could hear him breathing, heavy and uneven. We were partners, he said finally, his voice softer now. I trusted you. And I carried this company while you played golf and collected awards. I'm not the villain here, Gerald. I'm the reason Vanguard still exists. Patrick said you were being difficult, that you couldn't adapt to new leadership. Patrick fired me without board approval. That's not leadership. That's incompetence. More silence. He's my hire, Gerald said. The board signed off on him. Then the board made a mistake. Again. I heard him sigh, long and exhausted. This is going to get ugly. It doesn't have to. Patrick violated protocol. The bylaws are clear. Reinstate me, suspend him pending review, and we move forward. Simple. You really think it's that simple? I know it is. He hung up without another word. I drove for another 10 minutes before pulling into a coffee shop parking lot. I needed to regroup, to think through the next 48 hours. Inside, I ordered a black coffee and sat by the window, watching people move through their ordinary Thursday afternoon, completely unaware that my entire professional life was collapsing and rebuilding itself in real time. My phone buzzed again. This time a text from Lydia in HR. Ms. Monroe, the board has requested your presence at an emergency meeting tomorrow at 2 p.m. Please confirm attendance. I typed back, confirmed. Another buzz. This one from an unknown number. You just made the biggest mistake of your career. Enjoy unemployment. Hey. I didn't respond. Didn't need to. Tomorrow he'd understand exactly how badly he'd miscalculated. I finished my coffee, got back in the car and drove home. My house was a small 2-bedroom on the outskirts of town. Nothing fancy, nothing excessive. I'd bought it outright 12 years ago with a bonus from a contract Gerald had nearly blown by promising delivery dates we couldn't meet. I'd fixed it like I fixed everything else. Inside, I dropped my bag by the door and sat down at the kitchen table. My laptop was still warm. I opened it and pulled up the financial dashboards, the real ones, not the sanitized versions Patrick would see. Vanguard was profitable. Very profitable. Revenue had grown 18% year over year for the last 5 years. Our client retention rate was 94%. We had contracts with 3 Fortune 500 companies and partnerships in 12 states. Patrick hadn't built any of that. Gerald hadn't either, not really. I had. And tomorrow I was going to make sure everyone in that boardroom knew it. I barely slept that night. Not from nerves, from focus. I spent hours reviewing every document, every clause, every shareholder agreement. I ran simulations in my head, mapped out every possible argument Patrick might make, every angle the board might question. By the time the sun came up, I had my strategy locked in. Professional. Factual. Unshakable. I wasn't going into that boardroom to beg or negotiate. I was going in to enforce the rules they'd all agreed to follow. At 1 p.m. I put on a charcoal gray suit, simple but sharp, and drove back to the Vanguard building. The parking lot was fuller than usual, more cars than a typical Friday afternoon. The board was here. All of them. Inside, the receptionist Angela looked up as I walked in. Her eyes widened slightly. Ms. Monroe, they're waiting for you on the 3rd floor. I nodded once and headed for the elevator. The ride up was silent. My reflection stared back at me from the polished steel doors, calm, composed, ready. When the doors opened, I stepped into the executive hallway. The boardroom was at the end, glass walls, heavy wooden table, high-backed chairs. I could see figures moving inside, shadows against the afternoon light. I walked forward, steady and deliberate. Outside the door, I paused for half a second, adjusted my collar, took one breath. Then I opened the door and stepped inside. 9 faces turned toward me. Gerald sat at the far end, looking older than I remembered, his tie slightly crooked. Patrick was near the center, arms crossed, jaw set. The other board members, Fletcher, Carrington, Oakes, Pemberton, Russo, Hayworth, and Sinclair, were scattered around the table, expressions ranging from curious to concerned. At the head of the table sat Judge Harlan Cross, our board chairman, a retired federal magistrate with silver hair and a reputation for zero tolerance for nonsense. Ms. Monroe, he said, gesturing to an empty chair. Please sit. I walked to the chair, set my leather folder on the table and sat down without a word. Judge Cross folded his hands. We're here to address the events of yesterday and the documentation you submitted. I've reviewed the materials. They appear to be comprehensive and legally sound. Patrick leaned forward. With respect, Judge Cross, this is a smokescreen. Ms. Monroe is upset about a personnel decision and is weaponizing old bylaws to create chaos. I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes on the judge. Section 12 of the corporate bylaws, I said evenly, requires full board approval for the termination of any founding executive. That's not old. That's current. And it's not a suggestion. It's binding. She's twisting the language, Patrick said, his voice rising slightly. I was hired to make tough decisions. That includes staffing. Judge Cross held up a hand. Mr. Sloan, you'll have your turn. Right now, I'd like to hear Ms. Monroe's position. I opened my folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. The equity breakdown. I slid it across the table toward the judge. This, I said, is the current ownership structure of Vanguard Logistics International. As of this morning, I hold 82% of all outstanding shares. Gerald Whitmore holds 11%. The remaining 7% is distributed among the board and employee stock options. The room went still. Fletcher, a logistics veteran in his 60s, leaned forward to look at the document. His eyebrows rose. 82%, he said quietly. Accumulated over 28 years through stock buybacks, equity conversions and board-approved transfers. Every transaction is documented. Every signature is verified. Patrick's face went pale. That's impossible. Gerald founded this company. Gerald co-founded it, I corrected. With me. And over the years he chose to liquidate his equity for personal expenses while I chose to reinvest mine. The math is simple. Gerald shifted in his seat. He didn't speak. Judge Cross studied the paper then looked up at me. And you're invoking Section 12 based on this ownership position? I'm invoking Section 12 based on the fact that Mr. Sloan violated it. The ownership structure simply clarifies who has the authority to enforce it. Carrington, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, spoke up. If this is accurate, Ms. Monroe, you have controlling interest. Why didn't you simply overrule the termination yourself? Because I believe in process, I said. I could have walked in here and fired Patrick on the spot. But that would make me no better than him. Instead, I'm following the bylaws. The same bylaws we all agreed to uphold. Patrick slammed his hand on the table. This is insane. You're all just going to sit here and let her hijack the company? Judge Cross turned to him, his expression hard. Mr. Sloan, Ms. Monroe owns the company. There is no hijacking. There is only enforcement of existing governance. Patrick's jaw clenched. He looked around the table, searching for support. Nobody met his eyes. Gerald, he said, his voice desperate now. You brought me in to fix this place. To modernize it. Are you really going to let her undo that? Gerald finally looked up. His face was drawn, tired. I didn't know, Patrick. I didn't know she had this much equity. That's not my fault, I said. You had access to every financial report, every board packet, every shareholder summary. You chose not to read them. Pemberton, an accountant by trade, cleared his throat. For clarity, Judge Cross, if Ms. Monroe holds 82%, does that give her unilateral decision-making authority? In most matters, yes, the judge said. But she's choosing to operate within the board structure, which I respect. The question before us is whether Mr. Sloan's termination of Ms. Monroe was procedurally valid. Based on the bylaws, it was not. Patrick stood up. So that's it? She wins because she stockpiled shares. She wins because she followed the rules, Judge Cross said. Which you did not. Patrick looked like he wanted to flip the table. Instead, he grabbed his phone and stormed toward the door. If you walk out of this meeting, Judge Cross called after him, you'll be considered in violation of board protocols. That will not help your case. Patrick stopped. His hand was on the door handle. For a long moment he stood there, frozen, his back to the room. Then he turned around, jaw tight, and sat back down. Judge Cross nodded. Thank you. Now let's proceed with the formal vote. Ballots were passed around the table, simple paper slips with two options. Uphold the termination or reverse it. I didn't vote. Didn't need to. My 82% spoke louder than any ballot. One by one, board members marked their choices and slid the papers back to the center of the table. Judge Cross collected them, unfolded each one, and read them aloud. Reverse. 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 Patrick's face grew darker with each word. Reverse. Reverse. Gerald hesitated when his ballot was read. Judge Cross looked at him expectantly. Gerald. He slid the paper forward without a word. The judge unfolded it. Reverse. Patrick exhaled sharply, a bitter laugh escaping his throat. Unbelievable. Judge Cross set the ballots aside. The vote is unanimous. The termination of Kaya Monroe is hereby reversed. She is reinstated as Chief Operations Officer, effective immediately. I didn't smile. Didn't react. Just gave a single nod. There's a secondary matter, Judge Cross continued. Mr. Sloan's conduct raises concerns about his suitability for the CEO position. Terminating a founding executive without proper authorization demonstrates either negligence or willful disregard for corporate governance. Both are grounds for review. Patrick shot to his feet. You've got to be kidding me. I am not, Judge Cross said. This board has a fiduciary responsibility to ensure leadership acts within the law. You did not. I was hired to make bold moves, Patrick snapped. To shake things up. That's what you wanted. We wanted competence, Fletcher said. Not recklessness. Patrick turned to Gerald. You're really going to let them do this? After everything? Gerald didn't look at him. You should have read the bylaws, Patrick. The room fell silent. Judge Cross tapped his pen on the table. We'll vote on Mr. Sloane's status as CEO. Same process. More ballots. More silence. This time I watched Patrick's face as each vote was read. Remove. 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 His hands balled into fists. Remove. Remove. Gerald's ballot was last. Judge Cross unfolded it slowly. Remove. Patrick stood there for a moment, staring at the table like it might give him answers. Then he grabbed his jacket off the back of his chair and walked out without another word. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Judge Cross looked around the table. We'll need an interim CO while we conduct a proper search. I'd like to open the floor for nominations. Fletcher spoke first. I nominate Kaya Monroe. Carrington nodded. Seconded. The vote was swift. Unanimous again. Judge Cross closed his folder. Effective immediately, Kaya Monroe is appointed interim CEO of Vanguard Logistics International. I stood, smoothed the front of my jacket and met his eyes. Thank you, Judge Cross. I won't let you down. I know you won't, he said. You never have. I walked out of that boardroom with the same calm I'd walked in with. No celebration, no victory lap. Just the quiet certainty that I'd done what needed to be done. The executive suite was on the 4th floor, a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the warehouse district. Patrick had been in there less than 24 hours, but he'd already made his mark. A motivational poster about disruption hung on the wall. His leather briefcase sat open on the desk, papers scattered everywhere. I stood in the doorway for a moment, taking it in. Then I walked to the desk, picked up the briefcase and set it outside the door. The motivational poster came down next. I rolled it up and dropped it in the recycling bin. By the time security arrived with Patrick's personal belongings, the office was already starting to look like mine again. Angela from reception appeared in the doorway, holding a stack of messages. Ms. Monroe, you have about 30 calls waiting. Clients, vendors, some press inquiries. Start with the clients, I said. I'll take those first. She nodded and disappeared. I sat down in the chair, adjusted the height and opened the desktop monitor. The dashboard lit up, showing real-time logistics data from every facility we operated. Trucks in transit, shipments pending, inventory levels, delivery confirmations. It was chaos. Organized chaos, but chaos nonetheless. Patrick had clearly been ignoring the day-to-day operations in favor of whatever strategic vision he thought he was implementing. There were delayed shipments, unanswered vendor emails, client escalations that hadn't been addressed. I rolled up my sleeves and got to work. First call was to our largest client, a pharmaceutical distributor in Pennsylvania. Their account manager answered on the second ring. Ms. Monroe, thank God. We've been trying to reach someone all week. I'm here now, I said. What's the issue? 3 shipments delayed, no communication, and our inventory is running low. We were told Patrick was handling it personally. Patrick is no longer with the company. I'm handling it now. Give me the tracking numbers. I pulled up the system, found the shipments and saw the problem immediately. Patrick had rerouted them through a cheaper carrier to save money, but that carrier didn't have refrigeration. For pharmaceuticals. I closed my eyes and took a breath. I see the issue, I said. We're rerouting to our standard carrier with proper refrigeration. You'll have your shipments by Monday morning. Thank you. Seriously. We were about to start looking at other logistics partners. You won't need to, I said. I'll send you a personal update every day until this is resolved. I hung up and made a note to fire whatever analyst had approved that carrier switch. Next call. Then another. Then another. By 6 p.m., I'd cleared the backlog, reassigned 3 major accounts, and scheduled emergency maintenance on 2 warehouse facilities Patrick had been ignoring. Angela knocked on the door. Ms. Monroe, there's someone here to see you. I looked up. Who? Gerald Whitmore. I hesitated, then nodded. Send him in. Gerald stepped into the office a moment later, looking smaller somehow. Older. He closed the door behind him and stood there, hands in his pockets. Nice office, he said quietly. It's the same office you had for 20 years. Yeah. He walked to the window staring out at the warehouses below. I screwed this up, didn't I? You hired 2 people in a row who had no business running this company. So yes. He nodded slowly. I thought Patrick was different. He had this energy, this confidence. I thought he could take Vanguard to the next level. Confidence isn't competence, Gerald. You should know that by now. He turned to face me. Why didn't you tell me? About the equity. About how much you'd accumulated. Because you never asked. And because I didn't think I'd need to use it. But you were ready. Always. He sat down in one of the guest chairs, suddenly looking exhausted. I don't even know what to say. I feel like I've been running this company for 30 years, and it turns out I haven't been running anything. You were the face, I said. I was the engine. That was always the arrangement. But I didn't realize the engine owned the car. I leaned back in my chair. What do you want, Gerald? An apology? Validation? Permission to be angry? I don't know. He rubbed his face with both hands. Maybe I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For not seeing it. For not appreciating what you did. I don't need your apology. I need you to stay out of my way while I fix the mess your nephew and Patrick made. He looked up, surprised. You're not pushing me out? You still hold 11%. You're still on the board. But you don't get to make hiring decisions anymore. That's non-negotiable. He nodded slowly. Fair enough. We sat in silence for a moment. For what it's worth, he said finally, you'll be a better CEO than I ever was. I know. He almost smiled at that. Then he stood, gave me a small nod and walked out. I watched him go, then turned back to the monitor. There was still work to do. Over the next 2 weeks, I rebuilt Vanguard from the inside out. I didn't announce a grand vision or host a company-wide town hall. I just fixed things. One system at a time, one relationship at a time. The logistics team got their software upgrades approved. The warehouse supervisors got the maintenance budget they'd been requesting for months. The client services department got actual authority to make decisions without waiting for executive sign-off. I spent hours on the phone with vendors, rebuilding trust that Patrick had eroded with his cost-cutting schemes and last-minute renegotiations. I personally visited our 3 largest clients, sat down with their operations teams, and walked them through our new reliability protocols. No flash. No theater. Just competence. By the end of week 2, our on-time delivery rate had climbed back to 96%. Client complaints dropped by 40%. Employee turnover, which had spiked under Patrick's 3-week reign, leveled off. The operations floor felt different. People made eye contact again. Conversations didn't die when I walked past. There was a rhythm to the work that had been missing. I passed Lydia from HR in the hallway one afternoon. He paused, looking nervous. Ms. Monroe, I just wanted to say I'm sorry. About how things went down with Patrick. I should have pushed back. You were doing your job, I said. But next time, read the bylaws before you walk into a termination meeting. She nodded quickly. I will. I promise. I kept walking. By Friday of the 3rd week, we'd signed a major contract with a national retailer. 5-year agreement, multi-state distribution, the kind of deal Patrick had been chasing with buzzwords and PowerPoint decks. We got it because our metrics were better than everyone else's. Because we delivered on time, every time. Because competence beats charisma when it comes to actual business. I drafted a memo to the team, short and direct. Team, thank you for your professionalism during recent leadership changes. The new contract reflects your dedication and reliability. Let's keep doing what we do best. I hit send and got back to work. That afternoon, Angela forwarded me an article from a business news site. The headline read, Vanguard Logistics CEO ousted after less than 1 month. The article painted Patrick as a visionary brought down by internal politics. It mentioned his private equity background, his ambitious plans for automation, his modern approach to leadership. It didn't mention that he'd tried to fire the majority owner. Or that he'd nearly tanked 3 major accounts in under a week. Or that he'd left the company within hours of being voted out. I closed the tab without finishing the article. Later that evening, I stood in the warehouse watching forklifts move pallets in precise choreography. The night shift supervisor, Ramon, walked up beside me. Feels good to have things back to normal, he said. This is normal, I replied. The last few months were the anomaly. He nodded. You need anything else tonight, Ms. Monroe? No. Go home. Get some rest. He headed back to the floor and I stayed there for a few more minutes just watching the work happen. There was no fanfare. No celebration. Just trucks loading, schedules running, systems functioning the way they were designed to. That was the real victory. Not the boardroom vote or the title or the ownership percentage. The victory was in the work itself. In the quiet competence of a company running the way it should. I walked back to my car, drove home and made myself dinner. Nothing fancy. Just pasta and a glass of water. The next morning I'd be back at it. More calls, more shipments, more problems to solve. But tonight, for the first time in weeks, I slept soundly. Because the company I'd built was finally in the hands of someone who knew how to run it. Me. A month later, Judge Cross called an official board meeting to formalize the CEO transition. By then the interim label felt like a formality. I'd been running Vanguard like I owned it because I did. The meeting was brief. Fletcher moved to remove the interim designation. Carrington seconded. The vote was unanimous. Congratulations, CEO Monroe, Judge Cross said with a slight smile. I nodded once. Thank you. After the meeting, I walked back to my office and found a bottle of champagne on my desk with a note from Gerald. You earned this. I set the bottle in the corner, unopened. Maybe I'd crack it someday. Or maybe I'd just leave it there as a reminder. A reminder that leadership isn't about titles or toasts or congratulations. It's about showing up every day and doing the work nobody else wants to do. It's about reading the contracts, understanding the systems, knowing the details that everyone else ignores. It's about being ready for the moment when someone underestimates you because they always do. Patrick thought I was a relic. An obstacle. Someone he could erase with a single sentence. What he didn't understand was that I'd spent 30 years building something he couldn't see. Not flashy equity or public declarations but quiet, methodical, ironclad control. And when he tried to take it away, all he did was prove that he never understood what he was up against. I sat down at my desk, opened the logistics dashboard and started reviewing the day's shipments. There were delays in Ohio. A staffing issue in Georgia. A client escalation in Nevada. I rolled up my sleeves and got to work. Because that's what leaders do. Not the loud ones. Not the ones with the expensive suits and the empty slogans. The real ones. The ones who know that power isn't taken. Turned. One decision at a time. One shipment at a time. One quiet, calculated move at a time. And when the moment comes to use it, you don't hesitate. You don't apologize. You just execute. The way I did with Patrick. The way I'd do with anyone who ever tried to take what I built. Because this company wasn't just my job. It was my legacy. And I'd spent 3 decades making damn sure nobody could take it away from me. Not Gerald's nephew. Not some private equity consultant with an expensive watch. Not anyone. I was Kaya Monroe. Majority owner. Chief Operations Officer. And I wasn't going anywhere.